You may begin.
Good evening. Welcome to the May 16th, 2024 meeting of the Public Safety and Sanitation Committee. My name is Stuart Desser and I am somehow chair of this committee. Tonight, we're joined by District Manager Jesus Perez. This meeting is called to order at 18:35. As a reminder, New York State law requires all community board members who are unable to attend the meeting in person to have their cameras on and their first and last names displayed from the time the meeting is called in order to, I'm sorry, from the time the meeting is called to order until the time the meeting is adjourned. Members of the public, if there are any who are attending virtually, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. Members of the public who are here in person, and there are none, but we'll go through this, can raise any questions by raising it. We need a volunteer to take the minutes tonight. How do you feel about that?
Sure.
Yes.
That's terrific.
It's a,
Oh, no, I'm sorry, you took the minutes already this year.
Last month, but I could do it again.
No, not
You
really.
could, but
I did.
Stephen
Oh,
O, would you mind taking minutes?
I can take the minutes.
That I just
Okay,
did.
Stephen O will be taking minutes tonight.
I was like, I saw them finish. It's so bad.
Just note for the future, the board keeps a tally of who's taken minutes, and it's fair that everyone take their turn. With that in mind, moving forward, I will give preference to people who are not here to take the minutes, because that way they can watch the video and we'll catch up with what transpired when they were absent. We'll now take attendance by roll call. Jesus will conduct the roll call.
I love that because it encourages people to be here and get some minutes taken.
That's a good vote. Good.
All right, good evening, committee members. I will call your name. When your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. Stuart Desser.
Present.
Thank you. Eric Goldberg.
Present.
Thank you. Rupal Pakad.
Present.
Thank you. Stephen O.
Present.
Thank you. Stephen Perez is excused. And Seligman.
Present.
Thank you. Haider Zaidi. Haider Zaidi. I'm not hearing anything. And we do have quorum.
Thank you. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board's office and is reflected on the screen right now. If there's no objection, we'll adopt the agenda. Members of the committee, if you object, please raise your hand. One. Seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. The minutes from the April 18th meeting are still being drafted. They'll be sent to you when they're ready. The standard ground rules: in order to conduct an efficient meeting, no one should speak until granted the floor. Committee members who are here in person, if you have questions about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand and I'll identify you so you can speak. Committee members unable to attend in person, if you have a question about committee business, you may raise your hand through Zoom and I'll identify you so you can speak. It's important that only one person speak at a time so those watching at home can understand what's being said. And the chat function for committee members present via Zoom should not be used for committee business or for questions about the agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us of any technical difficulties you have or to state in writing information like email addresses that were already stated on the record during the meeting. Tonight, we're very pleased to welcome David Johnston, the Vice President of Asset Protection at the National Retail Federation, who will talk with us about what we know about shoplifting and hopefully how to mitigate it. Shoplifting is a problem of national scope, of course, but mostly addressed locally. And while the rest of the country is seeing a sort of downturn in the amount of shoplifting, it appears to be increasing in New York City. The losses from retail theft in the state of New York are reported to be over $4 billion, about 4.4. I don't believe that number includes the expense of anti-theft strategies, and it certainly doesn't account for the emotional toll it takes on the humans who work at these establishments or own them. And I think even that's a sort of cold way of looking at it.
Yeah.
We live in a society where we supposedly expect safety, order, justice, and equity. Street crime certainly undercuts that. NYPD's CompStat includes a category for retail theft, which I presume is an elegant way of saying shoplifting, which is a narrower category than shrink. For the 2 police precincts within our district, assuming I'm reading the data correctly, retail theft is up 73% in the 13th precinct from the same time last year, with about 940 incidents reported through the start of this month. On the other hand, the increase in the 17th precinct is almost flat at something like 4%, with only 200 reported so far this year. And that's, of course, what's reported. There may be significant underreporting.
Yeah.
Which Mr. Johnson might address. I do want to acknowledge up front that there's been some misreporting about shoplifting in the national media. At one point, the threat from organized crime was grossly, if unintentionally, overstated. And Mr. Johnston will correct me if I have this wrong, but organized retail theft reportedly accounts for about 5% right now.
5% of
5%
of total retail theft.
of total retail theft, yes. Well, yeah, we'll leave it at that. Although Mr. Johnson can also talk to us about what we don't know, which is unfortunately sort of a large gap. We also know that some retailers, some chains have actually exploited this publicity about shoplifting to close stores that were actually closed for other reasons. But we also know in New York City that when we walk into a store, there's merchandise is stored behind acrylic or gates.
Yeah.
And we know that the business improvement districts are hearing a lot from their members. And so we know it's a real concern. Before Mr. Johnson speaks, I'm just hoping to get a little context from Senator Kruger's and DA Bragg's offices. So Alex Marinides represents Senator Kruger. I'm hoping you can tell us just very briefly what's in the just passed state budget and the state strategy for combating retail theft. And if you have anything else to say, take your opportunity now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Do I have a time limit on this? I'm going to try and keep it short, but I don't want to speak
We're
to
not timing you.
Okay, cool. So a few different parts of the state budget that were passed last month address the issue of retail crime. I'll start with Part A of the section of the state budget known as PPGG. That's the Public Protection in General Government. So Part A of this part of the budget, there's 3 elements in it that I want to address. So the first one is that it creates a new crime, an assault on a retail worker, and that makes it a Class E felony. So what is a retail worker? Everybody who is employed by a retail establishment, be they cashiers, floor staff, security guards, etc. And that, like I said, makes that a Class E felony. And I think the full list is cashiers, sales associates, floor staff, stocking staff, the owner, and other related titles, including volunteers of the retail establishment and security guards who are employed by retail establishments. So that's the first element of Part A I wanted to mention. The second element I wanted to mention was that it aggregates larcenies as part of enhanced sentencing. So what that means is that, right now it's, you can, well, let me restart. So the aggregation of petty larceny charges makes it so that you can basically, if somebody's arrested multiple times for stealing goods worth less than $1,000 total, instead of that all racking up as a series of misdemeanor charges that may take a while to get prosecuted, you can now combine those. And if it's over $1,000, it becomes a felony larceny charge. And the reasoning behind that is that, let me see my notes here. Repeat offenders could be charged for the amount they have stolen in total over time. And basically, previously many petty larceny cases would add up for one person, but would only be prosecuted as individual misdemeanors. This way, it's all combined in a way that makes it more efficient for DAs to prosecute people on those issues. And then three, let me see. Three is that it creates a tax credit, a commercial security tax credit for retail establishments. And for costs that, that incur cost for protection against retail theft. And that the definition of that is, well, you have to have 50 employees or less and one or more physical retail store to qualify for this tax credit. So uh, qualified retail theft prevention measures expenses include more than $4,000 for a company with less than 25 employees and more than $6,000 in costs for companies with greater than 25 employees. So if you spend that amount or more, if you are running one of these respective companies, you will get a state tax credit for the cost of commercial security. So that includes hiring security officers, installing cameras, alarm systems, et cetera, et cetera. And then part B of the public protection and general government part of the budget makes it illegal to foster the sale of stolen goods online. This was included to address third-party sellers that allow stolen goods to be sold on their platforms. And I'll just read the direct quote from the bill. A person is guilty of fostering sale of stolen goods when such person, for financial gain, acting alone or in concert with another person or persons, uses any internet website, application, online marketplace, digital service, or any other platform or venue, including any physical building, public or private space, or location to offer for sale retail goods or merchandise which are stolen or unlawfully obtained, and if the person selling them knew or should have known that such retail goods or merchandise were stolen or unlawfully obtained. Fostering the sale of stolen goods is a Class A misdemeanor. So that includes both in-person and online selling of stolen goods. The budget also allocated money to create a retail theft state police task force. And it's $40.2 million were allocated for dedicated retail theft teams within the state police and within DA offices and to work in local law enforcement. With money allocated for 100 state police personnel who are going to be dedicated to fighting organized retail theft going forward. Now, there was a bill that was passed last year in 2023, S6714. It was passed in both houses of the legislature, and it created a retail crime retail theft task force. Then that was vetoed by the governor. The reason that was vetoed is, I'll read the quote. It was part of a package of bills that the total cost of which would have been $35 million. And the governor, I think, said that money wasn't allocated for in the state financial plan last year. And also was concerned that some of those bills, perhaps including this one, would have created some overlapping bureaucracy that would have actually made things more complicated. And so in her veto message, which is Veto Memo 60 from 2023, if you're interested in looking that up, she says, because of the fiscal impact of this legislation, the proposals would be more appropriately considered in the context of the state budget process, which, of course, obviously she then did this year. So that is the reason that she vetoed it last year, and much of that bill was included in the current state budget in terms of the policies that were ultimately enacted. So that's my update. I hope that was helpful. I hope I didn't drone on for too long. Thank you.
Two quick questions for clarification. The aggregate is only if you steal from the same store, right? In order to elevate it to a felony. If you steal 500 from two separate stores, it's not raise that to a felony, correct?
My understanding is that it's if you've stolen $1,000 in total, but that's a good question. I don't have an answer for you on that. Sorry.
Okay, and is there anything that was in the bill that the governor vetoed that you feel is still missing from what the state is doing?
Nothing that I saw when I looked through the bill. But like I said, it was part of a suite of bills that were vetoed. So as far as I know, much of what was in that bill ended up being enacted in the state budget. And it was more a matter of, is there money in the state financial plan in 2023 to budget for this, or is it just going to create more work for people who already have enough on their plates instead of, creating money or allocating money to hire people who are specifically devoted for this task.
Great, thank you. Eric Strauss is here on behalf of District Attorney Alvin Bragg. If you could present just a quick overview of the DA's efforts in this arena, it would be appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep. All right, great. Thanks so much. Hope everyone's enjoying their evening. Stu, congrats on the new position. Looking forward to working with you more moving forward. But yeah, just to kind of jump right into an overview of our efforts to combat retail theft, I think it comes down to three different aspects that I can go over individually, but first of which is we're really trying to increase our communication and engagement with businesses and business owners, the retailers themselves. We have our Small Business Alliance, which you may have heard me talk about at past CB6 meetings, where we basically meet periodically with retailers, making sure that we're up to date on what they're seeing, what the conditions are like, and what they're experiencing, to make sure we understand the breadth and the full picture of the issue. And in doing so, we've been able to really increase our communication and collaboration with NYPD, specifically to identify the top recidivists that are driving this issue throughout the borough. I don't want to give everyone outdated statistics, but I know that we put a stat out, I believe, like a year and a half ago now, where we said around that we found that around 18 to 20% of repeat shoplifters were responsible for around 50% of the overall retail theft in the borough. So we're really trying to, especially with the resources that we have, the laws on the books, try to attack the situation where we can get the biggest bang for our buck, and obviously targeting those top recidivists is a way to do that. And then the other one is the third angle is we're really trying to attack this now from a fencing angle. We recently announced the results of a huge long-term investigation into a mom and pop retailer who we have now charged with fencing over or around the amount of $1 million in stolen goods. We put out a press release on our office website if anyone wants to learn more about that. But you can see too, just there's photos included in the basement, just wall to wall stolen goods that were intended to be fenced and resold. So that's another big issue too. And then also we're really trying to address underlying conditions where appropriate. So we know that people are taking advantage of the current situation, and for them, more traditional prosecution or maybe some kind of incarceration is appropriate. But we also know that a huge percentage or subset of the population who's involved in shoplifting is doing it to fuel some kind of underlying condition, whether that be an impact from a mental health condition or some kind of substance abuse. So I think the end goal for us is we really want to change a defendant or an individual's behavior. That's really, it should be the goal across the board. And there's two ways that we're doing that. There's one way we're doing it proactively. I know people don't often think of like the DA's office doing proactive work in this space, especially because it's typically, an arrest is made, a case gets generated, and then that case gets to our office. But we recently started to actually see our Neighborhood Navigators program come into effect. This was something we announced around a year ago. We granted $6 million to the Bridge to set up a network of neighborhood navigators to engage with these people before they enter the criminal justice system. They're navigators who have lived experience similar to those that they're dealing with, and we've seen a lot of success there. But then once an arrest is made, we also have our Pathways to Public Safety division. So they're basically responsible for assessing an individual's whether it's mental health or some kind of other condition that they may have, and then where appropriate, if it is somebody who could benefit from programming, diverting them to whether it's treatment or housing, substance abuse treatment, counseling, some kind of clinical component as well there. And we've seen a lot of success there too. We've seen that I think over the last year, we're just now coming out with data where we've seen that there's about an 85% success rate for those who completed our Pathways to Public Safety programming, where they were not rearrested. And that only goes up when you talk about being rearrested for more serious crimes. It's around 90% for felonies, and then 95% for violent felonies. So that's by and large a big improvement to what the numbers are absent any kinds of programming. So we're looking forward to improving that, continuing to hone it, and make some strides there. Just wanted to talk a little bit too about some tools that we have in the space. Despite a lot of the cases that we get for these being low-level misdemeanor cases. I know Alex talked about the petty larceny cases. There are still some things that I wanted to put on our radar that we do use often and we want to be using more. Trespassing notices. This is a good way for us to get a misdemeanor case up to a felony charge with a felony burglary charge. And we have been working with bids in the Midtown area, as well as retailers themselves, to give best practices on trespassing notices, and I can go over some of those if you'd like. Also, when it comes to bail, being able to apply something called harm is something that's really big for us. That was included, and I think the amendment, the first or second amendment, a year or two after bail reform was originally passed, basically allows us for, if an individual has an open case for shoplifting or some kind of harm to somebody's property, and then while they have that open case, if they're out and they reoffend, they get rearrested on another shoplifting charge. That existence of the open case there allows us to make a bail recommendation where we otherwise may not have been able to do so. And then, Stu, I know that you mentioned the emotional toll that some retail workers may experience when they're involved in a shoplifting incident. We have our Survivor Services Bureau, which does a great job connecting victims and witnesses to services, and we don't want to understate the like you said, the emotional or perhaps psychological toll that may be incurred by some victims or some of the staff at these retailers. So we offer counseling sessions and things like that to anyone who may be involved in a case. Last thing I wanted to mention really quick, not to take up too much more time, is that I know a lot of the attention gets placed on bail reform, but one of the biggest barriers for us, especially with these lower level cases or retail theft, is discovery reform. I know probably this group is more familiar than most, but after the passage of more recent discovery obligations, basically requiring us to certify, we've kind of tracked down every shred of paper or document from anyone who touched a case throughout its life cycle, has been exceedingly onerous and resource intensive for us. And I know, again, not to use out of date statistics, but around a year ago, when we put out a one-pager to advocate for discovery reform to be included in the state budget, we estimated that around 1,800 misdemeanor cases were just summarily dismissed due to us unable to meet our discovery obligations, and that can be the case for a number of different reasons. So we were hoping that it would be included in this year's state budget, but I don't believe that it was. We're going to continue to advocate for that as well. Yeah, I can talk about that more too if you'd like. Happy to take any questions. I don't know if you guys have any. Stu, I know that you had some more specific questions. I still would love to bring an attorney to maybe the next meeting to be able to really dig deep into what we're doing when it comes to aggregation and the other topics that you emailed about.
Well, we're going to give Mr. Johnston the stage now. He's been, we've given you the context, so it's your turn, and we don't have a timer on you either, Mr. Johnston, so go for it.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all this evening. And just a little bit, first of all, for those who are unfamiliar with the National Retail Federation, we are the largest retail trade association in the U.S. We represent over 1,000 members that range from domestic and international brands with footprints here in the U.S., all the way down to small and independent business owners. And many of them, many of them do have locations right in the fine city of New York City, and particularly Manhattan. So, we do have a big and a large footprint there. We also, every year, have our annual Big Show, which is retail's largest convention right in the city of Manhattan, every January. So we're happy to be down in New York City, supporting the economy and tourism and all that, the great stuff down there. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of walk through an overview of some of the aspects of what's happening in the retail environments today. Understand that a lot of this information may come to me from more of a national perspective, but it represents the brands that are in your neighborhoods, in your boroughs, in your city, and then can get into any specific questions that we may have with regards to preventive measures, protection, and so forth. What I will start off with, because I will use these two terms, and these two terms are often used interchangeably, but they are completely different, is the term of retail theft versus organized retail crime. Retail theft are the crimes that include the stealing of merchandise, cash, cargo, or the equivalent from a retail location. They are acts that often involve shoplifting, robbery, burglary, cargo, supply chain, gift card frauds and scams, and refund and return scams. Organized retail crime itself is not an actual criminal event or incident. It is typically involves a criminal enterprise that is organized and directs or encourages the various thefts that take place in the retail environment. They have the components that are often, and Mr. Straza mentioned this, that include a fencing operation, or the place where the goods that after they are stolen are then purchased from an individual or group. It often includes a distribution operation that then takes those illegally obtained goods and then starts to put them back into the resale channel, whether it be online or it be in a physical location. And then there's usually a financial component where those monies flow throughout the organization, and of course, can often be used for other illicit criminal activities. So I will use these terms, but I want to make sure we know that these terms are completely different.
Wait, I'm sorry, can I just interrupt for 1 second?
Sure.
They're different, but they are overlapping. Is that correct?
That is correct. When we talk about organized retail crime, we're talking more about the structure, the group, the individuals who make up these components, who are conducting the theft, selling the goods, and then going and reselling the goods to the lines. But there are instances, and I will talk about it, there are instances where, the shoplifters will say, or boosters, they could be part of the group, or they just could be shoplifters and they know where to go sell the merchandise and they have no knowledge of what happens thereafter.
Or they're
They
not
are
gonna stall, like they're stealing some soup and they're gonna eat it, right?
right. And I'll just, I'm getting it.
It's like a Venn diagram that does not overlap entirely.
That's correct. And you bring up a good point, because, I'm almost at 4 decades of retail asset protection, loss prevention. So, 37 years ago, I started my career catching shoplifters in downtown Boston. So shoplifting is not new. Professional shoplifting is not new. But what we recall as shoplifting, or what shoplifting was, is, it was that opportunistic, that amateur, the juveniles doing it for fun, those that may be, inflicted with substance abuse or mental health issues. And oftentimes it would be small quantities of items, right? Usually selected based on need, personal want, or opportunity to very quickly resell to support some habits. We also had professional shoplifting. I do recall my time where we had groups even coming from other countries up and stealing the high fashion, high priced men's and women's wear, and then taking that merchandise and going back to their countries, or others going to the bars and the nightclubs and taking orders and coming and stealing specific goods. And they use tools to defeat security and preventative measures. They selected merchandise often based on high price points and resale value. But what we are seeing today is a completely different category or breed of shoplifters. And those shoplifters are conducting these highly visible thefts. Shoplifting used to be the invisible crime. You walk into a location, you conceal the item or items, and you leave. But now we're starting to see these mob thefts, these smash and grabs, as we call them, throughout. The large quantities and the repeat offender, who oftentimes are becoming more aggressive, violent, and brazen, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We've also seen a change in where this merchandise is being resold. Prior to online platforms and the internet, You may have gone to a local market or a bodega or somebody who had an interest in buying goods that they could easily resell. Street vendors, flea markets, pawn shops, these are all things that we would go and we would use. But we do know that with the onset of the internet, peer-to-peer networks, marketplaces, and social media, we're starting to see more and more of an online presence, which does expand the criminal element. And we'll talk about that because now that creates a whole new organized retail crime effort taking place here. Stuart had mentioned our retail security survey, and just a couple of things we have on our most recent survey, which was published in 2023. He did mention a number. We do not, the NRF has not published a number on organized retail crime since about 2021. And we haven't done that because it's been very challenging. As I said, it's not a singular incident. So we can't really report how many organized retail crime arrests or incidents or so forth took place. I will state that he did mention we did do a retraction in a report that we had done. That was an error where the investigative partner that we had mistakenly inferred two statistics at the same year as being similar reports and did indicate a high level of organized retail crime as being responsible for the theft. So we've retracted that, and we've talked about that in several public cases on why that was done. But overall, retail loss nationally, according to our report and our respondents, was up to $112 billion. That's an increase of 19% over the last year. External theft, which includes ORC, was reported at about 36% of those losses. So it is a pretty substantial number when you look at it. More importantly, our retail respondents mentioned that 70% of them reported increases in theft by repeat offenders. 88% of them reported an increase in violence over last year in the shoplifters, whereas 61% reported an increase in losses by repeat offenders. And I will say that the two other statistics we have is just over half reported an increase in violence by repeat offenders, and just under half reported an increase in violence by juveniles. And by far, the number one risk, according to them, is organized retail crime and the violence and the threats that are taking place in the retail marketplace. We've also seen a large change in the target merchandise. And Stuart, you mentioned this in your opening about the number of products that are under lock and key in the retailers. Over recent years, and more especially over the last 2 years, the targeted goods have greatly expanded. They have gone from being the high price point or the high fashion goods to now everyday goods that are, many of them are under $20. And the goods are now being stolen based on their fast resale capability, as well as the ability to resell larger items of everyday goods. And I'll give you an example. I was talking to a product manufacturer who said that they have started to find goods repackaged in fencing locations in bulk to make it look like they're coming from the warehouse retailers that they're being sold. So no longer do you find just one item. You might find them repackaged as an item of 3 because that's what you could find at your local warehouse club. And depending on the retail segment, these goods can be extensive. If you think about a mass merchant, a grocer, a department store, all of the targeted items now in those areas have greatly increased, which makes it very difficult for them to try to protect everything. I will talk a little bit and just touch briefly because this often comes up is, okay, how did we get here? And the answer to this is there's really no one reason why we're here today. We can talk about some of the economic and financial challenges of individuals. We could talk about the mental health and the substance abuse. We can talk about some of the way, some states are looking at certain crimes, lacking resources in law enforcement, social media, online marketplaces, We can even look and see, you know, where's the e-commerce and the online platform and digital currencies that have helped us. Some of the other issues that we're looking at really, though, is, you know, is it a matter of just state laws not supporting today's criminal methods? And again, Mr. Straza mentioned some of the changes that they're going through. Mr. Melendez mentioned some of the things that the legislation is going through. And we just have to look and see how have things changed in the world of criminal and crime and criminals to make sure that we try to help ourselves out. I will talk, though, one element of what we are seeing, and the NRF, we definitely believe in this, is the increase in organized retail crime. Yes, we still have shoplifting taking place. Yes, there are those shoplifters who are stealing for need and in order to support themselves. But when we look at the indicators of a lot of these shoplifting events, and it's not just shoplifting, it's cargo theft and transit theft. We see items that are being stolen right from the ports. We see items that are being stolen from trucks and trailers. We can see that the frequency of these offenders, the types of merchandise they're taking, and even the quantities per event is not stealing for need. It's stealing for greed. And in some cases, many of these new breed of shoplifters have created their own businesses of going out and stealing and going and bringing them to these fencing locations to resell them. And we've seen the scope and scale of organized retail crime groups go from those local ORC organizations that from the theft to the fence to the resell is local and can happen in just a few blocks, to national and even transnational groups with our investigations that our retailers have done with local, state, and even federal agencies, where we have situations where products are being stolen, very much so in the state of New York and the city of New York City and even on Manhattan, and those products being sold are being offshored to other countries. And the amount of dollars that are taken in these larger organizations and the infrastructure is much greater than what we see at the local side. In some instances, in many instances, these organized retail groups, again, we talk about somebody has to steal for them. They are actually the ones soliciting, encouraging, and directing many of these individuals. Many of them, again, homeless or addicted to substance abuse, gangs and juveniles and the financially stressed. They're orchestrating them or directing them to go and steal. We've had a numerous amount of incidents across the country, including New York, where shoplifters have been, we have found shopping lists and burglar tools to defeat security devices and others that when they were arrested, they were told that they were provided these by the individual they were going in to sell the stolen goods for. So even though in the news we may see these flash mobs, these smash and grabs, the reality is most retailers are being hit by these individual shoplifters of 1 to 3 individuals, the repeat offender who's going and really creating a business of shoplifting. Some of the challenges that we have today when it comes to tackling the issue of crime and retail theft and even organized retail crime is inconsistent or inadequate data. A little bit of that was mentioned in the opening statement on, you know, the retail industry does not have a single database to be able to report all of the events of shoplifting and to work collaboratively. There have been a lot of discussions on that. Law enforcement themselves, we do know that, you know, even the UCR report and the new National Victimization Report and incident reporting, that is also challenged. Retailers have admitted to us and even admit to law enforcement that in many situations, they are not reporting all acts of shoplifting for several reasons. It could be because there's nothing that law enforcement is going to do, or they can't come to assist at the time because of strapped resources. we want to look at how we can better communicate and educate and work collaboratively. Retail and law enforcement has always had a very strong partnership, and I think we're starting to see that partnership grow even more and more. Again, Mr. Straza mentioned it on a recent investigation done by the DA's office and law enforcement. We're seeing that across the country. We're seeing more and more arrests now taking place at the fencing level and within that organizational structure than we have previously. Many of these investigations take months, even years. They take a lot of resources at the local level, the state level, and even cross jurisdictions where, shoplifting could be taking place in New York to support an organized group in California or in other states. We know that many of these groups travel. We know that many of these organizations will send stolen product, through the mail system and through, the distribution of the various transit distributors. So we always have to look and see what we can do to help the state and local law enforcement with these cross-jurisdictional investigations. We also know that there are some state laws that are ineffective or unused. And, we commend New York for taking a look at their existing laws. And as Mr. Melendez mentioned, adding things like aggravation is helpful because we go after those who are stealing from a business perspective, not from the need. Mr. Straza was absolutely correct when the retail industry does not want to put everyone in jail, but we want to help those who want to be and can be helped with health and human services. But we do know that we have to take a look at the laws and see how we can change things. We also have some lagging federal law and coordination. And that's something that the NRF is advocating for at the federal level so that we have some bottom-up work being done at the state and local level, but also some top-down. And the top-down legislation is more about coordination and support to the state and local agencies. Can we provide them with resources at the federal level, the federal agencies, to go after these larger groups who are conducting cross-jurisdictional crimes? Can we help them with information sharing and utilizing the task force approach to have state, local, and federal level engagement? We have to look at this as the true impact, because we do know that the true impact impacts the communities and the citizens of every community. The retail industry itself, 1 in every 4 jobs is either directly or supports the retail industry. The retail industry is also a major provider of our gross domestic product from our national economy. It is also a big driver of many individual communities when it comes down to, particularly when you look at cities like New York City, where tourism brings a lot to the state and the city, and retail is part of that revenue from the tourism. But we have to look at the thing. The number one priority to the retailers is the employee and the customer safety. And that's something where we have to look at what can we do to help make it more safer and make it safer for our employees, safer for the customers. The shopping experience, nobody wants to walk into a store and see everything locked up and have to wait 10 minutes for an employee to help them. Retailers don't want to do that. Retailers spend millions on product displays and packaging and things of that nature. The labor market, employee morale, trust in the retail sector, and more importantly, the impact to the community.
So tell us what best practices are at the retail level and what you believe that retailers are not now doing that they could.
And I wonder if we don't want to share some of this too with the Business Affairs Committee, which I'm on both.
Well,
I'll want your minutes to, right? Because I feel like they should know this, right?
we'll let them watch the tape.
Well, from a preventative measures, I think, first and foremost, starting off with building strong community partnerships. And we are starting to see that even more and more. When retailer can talk to community leaders, engage with law enforcement and prosecutors, it is going to take a community effort to help prevent, protect, as well as respond to what's happening out there. When you look at some of the measures that are in place, the foundational security practices are still ideal. Burglar alarm system, CCTV, and some form of merchandise protection. Now, I will say that today's thief, in some instances, could care less about those. And many retailers are starting to modify certain things, inclusive of security officers. Security officers used to be that physical deterrent that were, I would say, almost 100% effective. But now we see more and more shoplifters just grabbing things and running right past security officers. So we've gone and we've seen some retailers choose to, well, I'll add a canine component to that security officer to try to put a little bit of a different type of deterrent in place. So the foundational security practices still work, but may have to be modified. And when I say modified, talked about canine adding to security or CCTV. Does it require a different placement of the camera? Do you have to make sure that your cameras can actually see the faces of the individual or get the best picture of that individual? Because if you can't prevent them, you at least have good image to work with law enforcement to try to identify them. Another thing could be a public view monitor. So when someone walks into the store, to have a monitor with a camera so that they in fact can see themselves. We've also done work with the Loss Prevention Research Council out of Florida, who's looked at things like signage, placing signage in areas where this area is being monitored by closed circuit television. Thieves still do not want to be identified, and any way that you can put a measure in place to proactively inform them that, hey, they're being watched or they're being looked at is definitely a measure of success. The other thing would be environmental security measures. So taking a look at your store layout, are there any blind spots? And what merchandise is there in the blind spots? What I mean by a blind spot is if I go to an area of a store and if I look up and I can't see any employee or any cash wrap or register, they most likely can't see me. And so what merchandise is there? The other piece is what merchandise is at the front of the store. Oftentimes retailers would love to merchandise their location so that the newest merchandise is right at the front of the store. That may have to be altered now. And we also have some merchants, depending on the segment. I know jewelry, luxury goods, some of these others have gone to also adapt COVID-like measures where they may only let so many people in at a certain time, or they may have a queue standing or the closure of one door in a double door system. So to take a look at all of these different things. And then finally, customer service, believe it or not, still reigns the best. Greeting the person, acknowledging them in the store, taking notice and mentioning some of the things that they're looking at, seeing if you can help them. If they have items, can you hold the items for them? These are some of the ways to do that. But what we have to do is we have to make sure that we protect our retail environment, because if the merchandise isn't available for the consumer, that's a concern. If a new mother cannot go and get baby formula for her child because it was just shelf swept, that's a concern. If someone can't go and get medicine because all those items were stolen, that's a concern. We also don't want to create store closures. We had a statistic from our survey where 45% of our respondents said they reduced their operating hours because of crime and theft. We had 30% that said they reduced the product selection or removed products from their stores because of crime and theft. And 28% closed the location where theft was a reason for that. We don't want that. When those things happen, we lose tax revenue, we lose jobs, and of course, we lose the ability for our citizens to shop locally. So I will pause there and see if there's anything that I can answer specific to.
I will not ask my own question, but Steve Perez, who's not here tonight, sent you a question. What he said is he's been reading that a significant component of theft shrinkage is due to retailers' increasing reliance on self-checkout technology. Some reports indicate that retailers with self-checkout have double the loss rates of retailers that don't. So the question is, are retailers assessing the true cost of deploying self-checkout by accounting for an increase in shrinkage, and is it still profitable for them to do so because they're able to pay fewer employers?
Yeah, when it comes to self-checkout, first of all, we, the NRF, and I do not have any specific figures indicating or even comparing those locations that have self-checkout compared to those that don't from a shrink factor. I myself have not really heard that statistic that was provided, that it was double the number. I will say that, through the conversations that I've had with many retailers using self-checkout, it's really been an avenue where bad actors, can go to commit their thefts. And we see that with some, thieves doing the overscanning, where they take a smaller item and they put it over the more expensive item and they scan that barcode and drop both items in the bag. We've seen it with a failure to scan. It can also result, unfortunately, in good customers ending up stealing from the retailer, where they get frustrated because the barcode won't scan, or they try it 3 or 4 times and they go and they put it in their bag. But what I will say is that, individually, retailers are still trying to determine the ideal environment for the use of self-checkout. We have some segments and some individual retailers who have real good positive customer adoption of self-checkout, and sometimes that, what they're looking to do is they want to keep it because it is a positive engagement for their consumers. I myself enjoy self-checkout when I shop, but they have to look at some, again, technology and process and so forth in order to do it. We have other retailers who are just still trying to figure that out. So to answer the question specifically, I don't think at this time retailers are looking at self-checkout as we have it because we have it with an acceptable shrinkage percentage and we're saving on labor costs. I think they're still trying to go out and build their own individual plan for self-checkout. I also know of retailers who are using self-checkout who have not decreased labor. They just repositioned that labor into supporting the customers.
Questions?
I have questions for everybody.
And you have 1,000 of them.
I do, but I'll
Limit yourself.
some
to
of them are
15.
super short too, actually. But what made me go, oh, on Stephen's question is that, I wonder, one of the questions is about what percentage of shrinkage is due to employees, right? Don't answer that. I'm gonna ask a couple. And in general, like, what percentage of sales, like, I think we heard 4.4 billion in New York, and I think you said 112 billion nationally. Okay, so when I just did a real quick Google search, I saw for 2022 total retail sales were 7 trillion. And so that makes 112 billion, like 1.5%. I don't know if those are exactly the same years and all that, but I'm not saying this isn't a problem. But, if you say oh, a third of that is from employees and some of that is.
Are we basically blowing this out of proportion a little bit?
Maybe
Not that it's not an issue, but are we
Right,
making a
right.
bigger deal of it?
And sort of along the same lines of playing devil's advocate, this is a question for Alex. Do we need a new law for assault?
Yeah, I had my
Like-
question was about that.
Right, like, isn't assaulting anybody a felony?
And what would this new
Right.
task force even do? How would they be different from what we already have as part of law enforcement? And also the money that is being allocated to it, is it on top of what the NYPD already gets, which is an insanely high budget to begin with? Where the NYPD has these robots that they use for a few months and then they get discarded, and that's millions and
Right.
millions of dollars already wasted. So is this additional on top of already that budget?
So, and, for Eric, I wanted to mention that last month we got a great presentation from, I'm not, like the Midtown Community Justice.
Oh, the former Midtown Community Court.
Right, right. And
Yeah.
so I think we're pretty well informed on the things you were doing there and, it was very impressive. So, we appreciated that. So I don't know if anybody wants to answer any of those questions oh, and the last thing, I promise, is this is also for Alex, you said for companies that have fewer than 25 employees, so that's not gonna include like a Dwayne Reed or a CVS, which is where I think so much of this stuff is happening.
Yeah, so can I go ahead and answer, or are we?
So,
So I think, yeah, 50 employees or less.
50, sorry.
50 employees or less.
Fewer.
The text said less.
Sorry, I'm an editor.
No, I think you're right, but the text that I was
I am
reading,
right.
the research said less. So I have to say that because I don't want to, unintentionally misrepresent state law or anything like that.
Worse.
So 50 employees are, for the purpose of this, let's say fewer. And then one or more physical retail stores, that makes you eligible for that tax credit program. Yeah, so it's not for, it's for basically like a local chain, I guess, or, a pharmacy that's locally owned, if I had to guess, like a mom and pop type store. That's my understanding of it anyway. This is the text that I got from, what was in the budget. And with regard to the other points, those are fair questions. I just know that a lot of this was part of the governor's budget priorities, and I think the Senate and the Assembly have their own versions of it, and I think this, ultimately, I'm not sure about, different classifications for different jobs, what the intent of that would be, but I do know that, like I said, a lot of this was done through long negotiations that I personally was not a part of with the budget. So, like I said, a lot of this was the governor's budget priorities that ended up making it into the final adapted budget. And I can also, if you'd like me, I can also try and figure out some more comprehensive answers and follow up with you if you'd like me to do that.
yeah, please do. Mr. Johnston, is it blown out of proportion?
No, I don't believe it is. And we don't believe it is, nor does the retail industry. I will talk a little bit about shrink first of all, and then talk about, why we don't believe it's blown out of proportion. Shrink is a number of different factors. Shrink is defined as the variance between inventory and book inventory. So, physical inventories versus book inventories, the difference is, of course, the loss. And normally it's classified, or generally it's classified as internal theft, external theft, operational systemic errors, and then unknown. And to give you the statistics that's in our report from last year, about 36% was external theft, a little over 28% was internal theft, and then the remainder was operational systemic, and then a small portion was unknown. But one of the things that we want to look at when it comes to, particularly the organized retail crime, we're talking about, a number of different crimes that are taking place out there. So in some aspects of retailer shrink, anything from in many retail organizations, supply chain and cargo theft do not make it into this shrink calculation of their P&L. Gift card frauds, return frauds, those are financial crimes, and they often are in a different component of their P&L. So as retail has evolved and become what we call more of an omni-channel environment, which is a sharing between the brick and mortar stores and the e-commerce and online, it's become more difficult to actually, with a single figure inventory shrink, to capture all the losses that are actually taking place, and even to be able to categorize and classify that a missing item is actually for due to shoplifting. The shoplifting could be what's reported to or determined by the retailer. But if all of a sudden there's a large number of merchandise missing, they may not report that as theft because they don't know it was theft. So it could fall into operational or paperwork shrink, as we call it. To say that it's overblown, no, it is not. Again, I come with almost 4 decades of experience. I know where we were 4 decades ago. I've seen, when I started, it was retail stores, brick and mortar, and it was catalog. So even credit cards, we were using the machines in order to take someone's credit card. So the evolution of retail that I've seen over these last 4 decades, along with many of my peers and those in the retail environment, we have never seen this level of theft taking place before. We have never seen the frequency. We've never seen the number of items. We've never seen even the individuals doing the stealing are different. And then on top of that, to see the investigations that are taking place, the dollar amounts, and again, Mr. Straza, mentioned one recently that when you go and you actually physically see within some of these locations the amount of stolen merchandise, it is not. And then finally, I will say that retailers already operate on very small margin. And for them to go and have to put in the additional security measures, particularly the number of items, and again, this is a great example, is you walk into a local store and you see majority of its items under lock and key, that's an exorbitant cost to the retailer. They don't want to do that. They don't want to do that just for the way it looks from a display perspective. They want their customers to come in. So the amount of money they're spending, the amount of violence that we're seeing, the amount of, deaths that we've seen over the last 2 years from law enforcement, security officers, employees, and customers is what we've never seen this in the last 5-6 years. So I don't believe we're overstating it. I think it's a serious issue. It's an issue not only that New York City is facing, but throughout the country. And I can tell you finally, because I have the opportunity to also understand global trends, it's not just the United States. We're seeing a lot of similarities, even in our neighboring countries like Canada, where crime and theft and the violence, is continuing to escalate. And my belief and the belief of our retail members is we all have to take a role in curtailing this. Even the customers themselves, and I'll end with this if I may, Stuart, the consumer has to be more aware that if they go into a location or they go online and they see merchandise and they see branded merchandise in a location that they know is only sold through their own retail establishments, or they see a large quantity of the same item being available online on a marketplace or a peer-to-peer network, they need to be buyer beware and say, where are they getting that merchandise? And if they're selling it at a dollar point less than they can at their local CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, Target, or American Eagle location, why can that person sell that product brand new in a full size run or in multiple quantities for a price point less than I can get at the retail establishment itself? So we have to do a better job at even educating the consumer, because they're creating the demand
Yeah.
for these individuals to continue.
Yeah. Anyone else have something to ask or add? Steve, that's two. And you're not cut off. There's no allocation? Okay.
No, I'm good.
Steve O requests the floor.
Please.
This could be a question to either Alex or Eric or both. Alex, you mentioned that Part B, what was released in the budget it's illegal to foster the sale of goods online, and it can elevate to a Class A misdemeanor, is there any implications that said marketplace internet site would also face some kind of some kind of justice in terms of hosting said illegal products and goods?
That's a good question. I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't think I can answer that in a way that is probably accurate. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't think I have a better answer than Alex. Just to clarify though, Steve, are you talking about the host of the website that would be selling those goods? Okay.
Right. It's not a first time we ever heard of a website hosting illegal goods and services. In this case of retail thefts, I know this is a focus on the organized retail crime, but would this also affect the hosting, the guys who host the service, provide the service, the application? It doesn't seem like the language speaks to that.
Huh. Yeah, because Amazon is,
Yeah, it-
right?
It's also kind of hard to, like, how are you gonna enforce something like that?
I have a question, a simplistic question, but I like it. The large chains like Walgreens or, you know, that sell, that buy massive stocks of these goods and who are subject to, a lot of it being stolen. Is it such a challenge to have each one of the products specifically marked Walgreens or Dwayne Reed or whatever it is, which would make it very obvious if you try to resell it that it's stolen goods?
There are certain security measures and good merchandise protection elements out there that retailers are using. You know, some are using stickers on the merchandise so that if you peel the sticker off, it may say the retail brand and where, you know, this was purchased at X retailer. And if you peel the sticker off, it tells you that, you know, this item was not purchased because, you know, they'll do something at the point of sale. We also have, you know, RFID, which is radio frequency identification, that is starting to become more widely adopted across the retail industry, where each item itself is tagged and they use it for inventory purposes, supply chain. There are many of the larger retailers are more advanced in some of that work, but there are also still some challenges with, you know, building it into the manufacturing process of certain goods. I'm told like liquids, for example, if you take like a Tide detergent, it's kind of difficult to put it in its packaging. And then to some retailers, it depends on the cost of how much they are going to tag. I do think that as the years progress, we will start to see more and more of this digital identification being used. I know that many of these RFID tags and the technology is also being used to help law enforcement when they do investigations to identify, you know, these goods, where you can actually walk through a location with a scanner and say, okay, in this building, I have just identified that these are the products that now belong to me, the specific retailer. But it's still challenging.
If there's an Amazon or, you know, someone's hosting, third-party sellers, they need to be held liable for checking on whether the seller is legitimate or not, or the goods are stolen. The RFID doesn't tell them that this was stolen from a particular store, right?
In that instance, it would be difficult for an online platform to know whether, and, you know, first of all, you are correct with the Inform Act that was passed in Congress in 2022, and many states adopted their own versions of the Inform Act, that these platforms do have to verify and validate information of certain sellers who reach a specific threshold. But in what you described, it would be, I would think it is being very difficult for an online platform to know whether a single item on its platform was in fact stolen or not stolen. And even where it was, if you take an item that, if you take an item that can be acquired in a number of different stores, we'll use a power drill, for example. So let's say there's a Makita power drill. How many retailers sell or can sell that Makita power drill? So how do I know that that particular item, that particular Makita power drill was in fact stolen, and where was it stolen from?
And I think there's actually constitutional issues there, because there is, like, is that it's sort of analogous to a free speech thing, right? Isn't it like 421B or whatever?
Yeah, that's
Like-
literally what I was trying to Google right now. It's like, you can't sue the internet provider. I think there's even
For
like a
what?
law, something on, like, something that Congress has even passed.
Yeah, like years ago.
Yeah, like
Like
90s
30
or something, yeah.
Yes. So I don't know if it's the same because it's commerce as opposed to speech, but I don't know. It's just a thought.
Any more questions or comments? And seeing none, Mr. Johnson, thank you so very much for joining us. Eric and Alex also.
Thank you.
Al, did I say that right? Eric and Alex, thank you also. If you
Thank
do
you.
have anything that you wanted to submit to us later in writing, we'd be glad to receive it, and we'd actually read it.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, I would ask, if you've got, kind of crib notes for the best practices for retailers. As I said, I'm also on the business affairs, and licensing committee, and it seems like that would be something that would be great to share with that committee and with generally, sort of our retail buddies in the community. But
I will
thank
see
you.
what-
Thanks to everybody. This was really interesting.
Thank you all.
Thank
We
you.
will
For having us.
Have a good evening.
on Our agenda.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Eric.
I think Eric sent a link on the chat.
He did, he captured it, and we can send it to the committee if you'd like.
Thank you.
Of course.
So moving forward, the agenda is way packed with more stuff, old and new business. And I'm apparently supposed to make a report, although I've never figured out what to put out. But I will tell you what I'm thinking about for next month. First, since we're now also the sanitation committee, I'd like to hear from DSNY, just basically an overview of what's going on in our district with containerization especially, and getting rid of the rats. I heard today that we got a response from DHS, Department of Homeless Services. Department of Human Services. You think I'd know that, especially coming and knowing I was gonna say that. Homeless, thank you. About security at the shelters, we don't have a good answer. We have a dispute. So if we can get some more information, we'll try to bring them in next month. As we know, they won't show up. But we can possibly talk to some shelter owners. Most of what I want to do next month is, and we'll have new members present, is to talk about the scope, of what we should be doing. So, our portfolio is expanded obviously to sanitation, but I think even on the public safety side, the perception, the common understanding of public safety is police and prosecutors. It's sort of the blunt force side of it. What we don't have on our board is anyone addressing civil rights. And I think that when you talk about personal security in this country, certainly, you're talking about both facets. You're talking about security from street crime and security from government interference. It's a bit challenging to have a relationship with police and prosecutors and and also take a civil rights perspective, but I think there's also a profit to be had if we can talk honestly from all those angles. So I'd like to talk about whether we should do that. Uh, there's also the fact that as a community board, we do not have to worry about the next election. And we are probably gonna live in this community for a while. So we can take a longer view. We can take a longer view of crime, and we can look at some of the softer issues. Now, in some cases, we may want to talk with Health and Services or youth and education, but I think that we should possibly consider that. And, you know, finally, we need to talk about where we can actually be effective as opposed to just passing a resolution that looks pretty and doesn't get us anyplace. So effectiveness is important. So anyway, I'm hoping that we can have that discussion next month. And other than that, is there any other old or new business?
Well, can I just add something to what you're saying
But of
about
course,
sanitation? And this is like something that I had been thinking about working on, and it kind of fits in many committees and none, and that is rainfall remediation. And I think it might fall because it's sanitation related because it has to do with CSOs. It could be an environment, because some of the solutions are environmental, could be in transportation, because DOT, is where, but anyway, it's something I'm throwing out there for us to think about. We have a resource list that I put together a few years ago with few other people, and nobody has ever cared about it, and that's kind of depressing. So maybe that's why I still care about it.
we can. And yes, we can talk about that next month and, understand, of course, if the board, the we have names and a presumption of which committee will take up a particular issue, but that's just for convenience and organizing. We can always refer to another committee or to us, or, to the extent that different committees have some degree of expertise, it would be really good if we could get together.
And we don't necessarily have to talk about it any more than that next month. I just wanted to throw it out there.
No, that's where we'll go next month. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
Before we do, we did have a question from a member of the public
Oh, I'm sorry.
who asked whether there was a public session tonight. I informed him that we do not have a public session tonight. We rarely do at committees, but that if he had a specific question, he could raise his hand. But it does look like he has now raised his hand.
Oh, Charles Nye, I see right now.
Do you wish to recognize this member?
Yes,
member of the
please.
public?
I understand he's with CB5, our neighbor.
Yes.
Oh.
Hello. Hi. Hello, members of the committee. I'm a person with a visual disability, and I just want to say, when I'm out with my home health aide, especially in CVS and other stores, and even in your district, there has been times when there has been shoplifting happening. Unfortunately, when I'm there in the store, and I just want to say that even though shoplifting is bad, and I think it's reprehensible, and I definitely denounce shoplifting, but my fear is that incarcerating people where they're not getting any rehabilitation in incarceration could have this revolving a door, and I'm worried that it might just, if we, as you know, having a criminal record is a barrier in itself. And I think it could really be harmful for that person, maybe having a new start, maybe changing their ways. I think it might be more better if there was more restorative justice, maybe accountability. Maybe they could, I know in Europe they do a lot of restorative justice where they meet their victim, they sit down and really address what they have done. So I'm just really concerned about that we're just gonna have this vicious cycle. And I am worried. One last point, I just want to bring up as someone who is on welfare, you know, even though this is no excuse for shoplifting, the price of food has gone up, but food stamps hasn't. The New York State portion of SSI has not even increased since I've come into this country in 2006. It's just $87, and that's remained the same. There's a federal part and there's a state part, and that state part has stayed the same even through recessions during Barack Obama, and even through the pandemic. It's never been risen. There's never been an increase, whereas the federal portion has. So, and also with Medicaid medicines sometimes not being affordable, sometimes those Medicaid changes its formula. So sometimes covered medicine is no longer covered. I think some of that might be also triggering factors why someone might take the sad decision to shoplift, because maybe they can't get their insulin, or maybe they can't put food on the table for their children or something like that. So I just wanted to mention those things. Thank you.
Thank you. We have actually discussed that in previous meetings, and I have in fact also read at least one report, I think out of Connecticut, where they did a study, and people where the district attorney declined to prosecute had a lower recidivism rate than those who were prosecuted. One of the presumptions is if you're arrested and you get and then they allow you to get away without prosecution, you know how close you came and you don't want to risk it again. But whatever the reason, yeah, we're pretty.
Or maybe you get connected to services.
And they're connected to services, yes, and just the district attorney of New York County is very much into doing that. It's somewhat disturbed the local precincts who don't always recognize that these are people who may actually not be recidivists because the police arrested them, but the prosecutor did not prosecute them. So we are aware of that and do appreciate your comments.
Oh, thank you. Can I just say one last point? Sorry. On the news today, the 125th Street Business Improvement District, actually there's this new thing they're doing in the city. Mayor Adams just said about cameras that have real-time connection with the police precinct, and they're hoping that could also be a deterrent. If you guys want to check that out, I just heard it earlier today on Eyewitness News, coincidentally. So you might want to check out that story. But thank you for giving me the permission to speak today. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the good work you guys do. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. So am I free now?
Yes.
Excellent. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Hearing no objections, we are adjourned at 19:57. Oh, I'm sorry.
All right. We will.
Thank you, Stephen, for volunteering almost cheerfully to take the minutes. It does disturb me. Are we still recording? Thank you. It does disturb me that you have not cleaned the platform of the subway behind you for such a long time.